Here with this week's hottest stories in the investment world, this is Zach's Friday Finish Line.
Hello and welcome to the Zach's Friday Finish Line. I'm Ryan McQueeney, a content writer here at Zach's, along with one of our editors, Maddy Johnson.
Hello, today is Friday, March 16th, and we're here to recap this week's biggest stories from the investment and financial world. Trump's tariffs were officially implemented this week, followed shortly by reports of more possible levies on China, but that wasn't the only news from Washington, and we'll touch on that later. But the White House also made some headlines by blocking a major tech merger and by firing one of the cabinet's top members.
But before we get into that, we owe it to all of our listeners to cover all of the latest juicy trending stories out there in the pop culture world. So first of all, actually, happy St. Patrick's Day. Tomorrow is the real St. Patrick's Day?
It is the real St. Patrick's Day. And I think it's kind of a big deal because it's on a Saturday this year. And it's not like in the middle of the work week. Everyone can go a little crazier.
Yeah. And I don't even actually know. I mean, I feel like my perception of it is so skewed because we live in Chicago and it's like crazy. This is like one of the craziest places in the world to celebrate it.
Yeah.
So I don't even know if it like people care outside of the city. Right. But so happy St. Patrick's Day. But then on a less light note, we also wanted to talk about the pop culture trend of the week, which has been this conversation about dogs and airplanes. And I'm aware that it's not funny, but I haven't really been paying attention to the stories this week. So I was hoping, Maddy, you could fill me in on what exactly went down.
Well, there's two.
Okay.
Two big ones. Okay, so the first one is this little French bulldog, tiny little baby, it's less than a year old, died on a flight from like Houston to New York. Mm-hmm. And this mom and her 11-year-old daughter and a newborn was fine with this French bulldog. And I think
their pet, presumably.
Their pet,
okay.
Yes. And before the flight took off, from what I have been reading, it was in its carrier, as you're supposed to do when you bring a pet on a flight.
Or a baby.
In its carrier, yes. Zipped up. You feed it through the little holes.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. The flight attendant apparently told the family that they had to put the carrier up in the overhead compartment.
Allegedly. This is
allegedly.
Yes.
Because we don't know. We weren't there.
Serious accusation based on what happened later in the story. I'll let you finish.
Yeah. The dog ended up dying because the flight, 3 hours long. There's not a lot of air circulation in those overhead compartments.
As it turns out.
It turns out. And fun. Well, there's just like a lot of like details that I think we as the public still don't know, and a lot of details that the reporters don't know still, where the daughter was like trying to say, to the flight attendant, like, there's a dog in the carrier, The flight attendant was adamant that the carrier had to go up into the overhead bin. But when at the end of the flight, when they took the carrier out and everyone discovered that the dog was dead, the flight attendant was apparently shocked and like horrified. So from
like
that,
acting like didn't know there was a dog in it.
Didn't know there was a dog in there.
So it could have been a miscommunication.
There was definitely miscommunication. The mother didn't speak English, so the daughter was not only having to translate for her mother, but also having to deal with a very stressful situation, with communicating with a authority figure / flight attendant. So it's just a tragic situation, like, overall.
Yeah, definitely.
And I guess like the dog was barking in the overhead compartment.
Yikes.
But then you have to wonder, like, other people must have heard the barking.
Yeah.
So why didn't
Yeah.
anyone else?
And this was a United Airlines flight?
This was a United Airlines flight. Like, why didn't anyone else speak up, say anything? But again, we went there. I don't know. We're just speculating, ruminating, trying to like flesh out the situation.
Good point.
I was talking to our audio editor just a little bit ago. I'm thinking that it's no one's fault, but it's everyone's fault at the same time.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
So it was a completely avoidable situation and tragic one. It's just all around.
Yeah, I know exactly. I feel exactly what you're saying right now. And then
Because I don't think we can blame the flight attendant because we don't know the whole situation. I don't think we can blame the family because we don't know the whole situation. It's just, I mean, this like mother was traveling with an 11-year-old daughter,
stressful,
a newborn,
and
another newborn,
hands literally full.
That puppy is like a literal newborn.
Yes.
So
I think you're 100% right. However, later in the week, we would come to find out that perhaps United Airlines is not the best with pets.
No, they have
general.
a horrible track record. Like horrible.
Out.
Like over like the past like I don't know how many years or like whatever like they do like this study, but like it's like or they like how many like deaths, animal deaths like occur on airlines, like 3/4 of them or something. I don't know the exact like percentage. Like have happened on United Airlines.
It was something like 20% of all pet travel is United, but upwards of 75% of of deaths related to pet travel.
But after this death of Kikito was the French bulldog's name. I know it's
cute.
Just so cute. United did say it will require in-cabin pet bags to carry bright colored tags, which I do think is a smart move going forward. But it was not the only pet related incident.
Wait, there's more.
This week, a German Shepherd was flying to Kansas City, I believe from Oregon, but was instead flown to Japan.
Okay, hold on. German Shepherds are large.
Yes, so they would be placed in the cargo hold of a plane.
Oh, okay.
So, yes, not in a pet carrier.
Got it. Okay, got it.
So this poor German Shepherd dog was, instead of a 3-hour flight, was taken on like a 16-hour flight across the world. And I guess the family, the owners, when they went to go pick up their dog, like at customer service, they were instead given like a Great Dane instead. Was like, oh, they were like, this is not my dog whatsoever. But I believe the dog is like on its way back to the States.
Yeah.
I think it's flying first class. So hopefully, I guess the owner was saying it had an ear infection and it hadn't been taking its medication for like 3 days. So hopefully, like fingers crossed, it survives this flight. I mean, it is a very long flight from Japan.
I want to make one comment on this particular story and then we can move on. Imagine being the hourly / whatever, just kind of bottom man on the ground level employee who's giving this dog back to the family and they say, this isn't our dog.
You're just
like, what are you talking about? I've done this before and no one has ever said that in response. So
yeah, I would not want to be that employee.
A bad week for United, not the first time that we have seen United have a rough week related to PR headlines. And what I thought was most interesting is that before all of this went down, United shares actually climbed after the company announced that it was upping its unit revenue guidance for the first quarter of the fiscal year, and then provided strong full year earnings guidance. But as we know, these PR issues, especially we've dealt with them with United in the past, they can be damaging for these airline companies, these little mini Twitter boycotts and whatnot. And we've seen United drop about 4.5% from its weekly high in the wake of these new headlines.
Yeah. I know probably all dog owners are hugging their dogs just a little bit tighter this week. So anyways, moving on to more financial news, Ryan has the latest activity from one of our most talked about companies here on the Friday Finish Line, Apple.
Yeah, so Apple on Monday announced that it will acquire Next Issue Media's digital magazine subscription service, Texture. So this is an app that rolls over 200 different magazine subscriptions into one monthly service. It's actually been appearing in the Apple App Store for many years. And we don't know too much about the acquisition. It's unclear exactly how much Apple paid for Texture or how much revenue this addition to its services division might bring in. But what it is clear is that it's just another tiny little piece of the puzzle for Apple as it tries to figure out how to become more than an iPhone company. So looking back to the previous quarter, Apple posted total revenues of $88.3 billion. It's almost $90 billion in quarterly revenue. That is crazy, crazy numbers. That was up 13% year over year and a record, an all-time quarterly record. However, iPhone sales still accounted for 69.7% of total quarterly revenues, almost 70%. That has been a trend that we've seen for many, many years now. Definitely the iPhone company. But it seems like the company does not want to rely on this segment for such a high percentage of its sales forever. It would be easy to say they don't want to rely on this segment, but going from 70% to even something that's more like a plurality as opposed to a majority is a huge feat. So any amount that they can kind of whittle away the dependency on the iPhone without losing overall revenues would seem like a good plan. And one way we've seen them try to make this happen over the past year or so is really, really fleshing out its services segment. Services revenues in the most recent quarter surged 18% to hit $8.5 billion. That was only about 10% of total sales, 9.5 to be specific. But the segment expanded more quickly than the iPhone, iPad, and Mac units did. And when you look at the iPhone tape bringing in 70% of total revenue, and the services taking, almost 10% of that remaining 30%, it is quite the large segment. And then for those who don't know kind of what we're talking about with services, it does include Apple Music, Apple Pay, iTunes, Apple Care, App Store, and it's probably going to be where this magazine fits in. We'd love to kind of break it down more specifically than that and show, exactly how much revenue something like Apple Music is bringing in right now. We don't have those numbers. Apple is not super transparent with that, but we do know Apple's services segment overall in the most recent quarter is the fastest growing in terms of revenue growth, and actually brought in more total revenue than the iPad and Mac segments. And bolstering that a little bit with this acquisition of Texture, again, a magazine subscription service, online magazine subscription service. So definitely an interesting story out of Apple this week and a trend to keep our eye on heading forward. Speaking of trend, that's not going to be a good transition. Speaking of trends going forward, how about we just hard pivot to another classic American company, Ford.
Yeah, so Ford shares actually gained this week despite concerns over a new recall that could affect up to 1.4 million vehicles. I heard about this on the news this morning. Ford said the affected models were Ford Fusion and Lincoln MKZ vehicles from the model years 2014 to 2018. The automaker also noted that it was aware of 2 accidents and 1 injury that may have been caused by the defect. I think it's when steering wheels were
loose,
coming just coming off.
Yeah, it was a loose steering wheel that was so bad that it caused full detachments on some.
I honestly, my worst nightmare.
Yeah, that's that and brakes. Not there's the touching the brakes. And
the 2 worst driving scenarios.
Yeah.
I drive pretty often, I guess.
Yeah.
But I could not imagine that.
It's almost
happening.
Comedic in a sense. It's
just
a Three Stooges type of thing where they're driving the car and the steering wheel comes off.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But, regardless, the auto giant's latest Analyst upgrade was enough to outweigh these issues, steering wheels just coming off. In a note to clients Wednesday, Morgan Stanley analyst Adam Jonas suggested that President Trump's mooted infrastructure plans could support Ford's near-term earnings. So while the company could also surprise investors to the upside of its cost-cutting and market repositioning moves are successful, Ford was lifted 2 notches to quote-unquote overweight by analysts at Morgan Stanley, marking the firm's first upgrade for the carmaker in nearly 4 years. Ford would gain even more positive sentiment later in the week when CEO Jim Hackett said he sees upside to the automaker's longer-term 8% target for profit margins, and citing progress on cost-cutting initiatives and new product development procedures. So, good analyst sentiment for Ford. It's always a good sign, but, people are getting in crashes because
that's not good.
Steering wheel
And
issues.
more importantly for them, 1.4 million vehicles, nothing to bat an eye at. Definitely going to cost some, take a little bit of chunk out of earnings. It'll be interesting to see if they comment on to what extent that recall does affect earnings. But yeah, it was interesting to see that note come out earlier in the week saying, hey, if these two things happen, Ford could be even more profitable than we expect. And then Jim Hackett later in the week says, these two things are happening and we might be more profitable than we expected. So another company to keep an eye on. Moving on, we're going to, in my notes, I just have it highlighted more White House drama as the name of this segment. So I should give you an idea.
It's nothing to do with Stormy Daniels, unfortunately.
No, we are not talking about any Stormy Daniels stuff, unless you want to get into it. No, we'll save that for a different.
It's not really like business or financial related.
Yeah, exactly. But there was still plenty in that realm of things to talk about somehow over the course of this week. Maybe didn't get as much.
Now there's like two famous Stormies. Stormy, as in Kylie Jenner's daughter, and Stormy, the porn star who could actually take down President Trump. Who knew? Who knew?
That's a good point. I didn't even. I guess I did know that Kylie did named her baby Stormy,
but with an I. It's a
important
key difference.
Distinction.
Key difference.
So
Go
anyway,
on.
as mentioned, still plenty of other news coming out of Washington D.C. If you look at shares of Qualcomm, actually dropped on Tuesday, down on the week after President Donald Trump shut down the chip maker's proposed merger with Broadcom, or should we say Broadcom's proposed merger with Qualcomm, because it was a bit of an aggressive takeover plan there. In a presidential order released on Monday, Trump said he had, quote unquote, credible evidence that led him to conclude that Singapore-based Broadcom's buyout of Qualcomm would have impaired the national security of the United States. The deal, if it had gone through, would have marked the largest technology acquisition in history. So we don't know what that credible evidence is, and we don't know exactly what the national security issue is there. But Trump confident enough to say that it was too big of a threat to approve the merger. So we move on from that. Also, earlier this week, on Tuesday, President Trump ousted Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. It's almost kind of funny how this is like already buried down the list of things that happened this week, because this is the Secretary of State, which is a very, very high-ranking position. What is it? Is it third in the order of succession? I think so, right? Third or fourth or top five. I'm comfortable in saying
top
that.
Top five.
So on Tuesday, President Trump ousted Secretary of State Rex Tillerson from his position. Tillerson is obviously the former CEO of ExxonMobil and was considered to be a level-headed businessman with an appreciation for global deals. So his firing might be another indication that the White House intends to shake up trade and international policy.
So a little more drama, but as Trump continues to remove global-minded leaders from his office and ramps up aggressive trade rhetoric with partners like China, fear is starting to creep into the technology sector. The space was isolated from trade woes, as the news will likely impact U.S.-based metal importers the most. However, Washington's latest moves, including Tillerson's departure and the rejection of the Broadcom-Qualcomm deal, just say that fast, like 7 times, could spell volatility for the sector. This doesn't necessarily shake up the fundamental picture too much, but political turmoil could cause short-term risk, and that could inspire profit-taking after tech's insane bull run over the past few years.
Definitely a sentiment we've seen emerge this week. We'll say Broadcom, Qualcomm, very difficult to say in conjunction.
Broadcom, Qualcomm,
What's interesting
Broadcom,
to me,
Qualcomm,
too, is when you
Broadcom,
look at it, is Broadcom does 1M and Qualcomm does 2Ms. And I think they're both plays off of the word communication. And I know telecom you can technically spell with 1M or 2Ms. So how do we shorten the word communication?
You can spell it with 1M?
Oh, yeah. And Broadcom
I feel like that's incorrect, though.
Broadcom goes with that singular M way to short it as well. So it's very interesting.
I don't like 1M in telecommunications.
Do you like the way that Broadcom looks on paper more than the way that Qualcomm looks? I like the 2M in Qualcomm as well, if I have to pick one.
Yeah.
The more
But
M's,
in
the merrier.
telecommunications, it should be 2Ms.
I agree.
Because it's like communications. 1M, that's stupid.
Like, I'm pretty sure Qualcomm stands for quality communications, although I could be wrong on that. And we would have to maybe Google that. I probably should before I just start making inaccurate statements, such as the fact that the Secretary of State is not the third in the line of succession. It's fourth. We got an editor's note. It is the fourth in the line of succession.
Behind Paul Ryan?
Yeah, I think Vice
so.
President and then Speaker of the House and then Secretary of State, probably.
Yeah. Ugh, Paul Ryan. Love him.
Anyway, that just about does it for us this week. Like we just end the show on me being maybe wrong about a bunch of stuff right in a row. That does it for us this week. I'm going to get out before I say any other inaccurate information. Feel free to shoot us an email at podcast@zax.com. I'm actually going to propose a challenge to any of our listeners still paying attention to my spiel. Without Googling it, email me at podcast@zax.com with the longest that you can go in the line of succession accurately off the top of your head. And I'll give the winner a shout out. You can also, while you're at it, check out all of our other exclusive audio content at zax.com/podcasts. Remember to subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next time on Zach's Friday Finish Line.